My name is Mark Eccles. I've been employed in the oil and gas business in Utah since 1983, managing drilling, completion, and production operations. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about my concerns with the proposal to apply the sales tax to services that have not previously been taxed in the operation of the oil and gas business in Utah. My concerns have to do both with my respect for this industry in the state of Utah and for the economy of the rural area where my children were born and raised. I think both are in jeopardy if this proposal goes through. I have been involved in legislation back in the 90s that had to do with oil and gas taxation. And I'm an old semi-retired guy who's doing this for free because I believe in it. I'm concerned that the producers are not being heard, and I'm concerned that nobody from rural Utah appears to be on the task force. If you look at the map of the Rocky Mountain producing states, you'll see light green areas that are the basins where production is located, and then the actual areas where the fields are inside those basins is darker green, and those could be oil fields or gas fields or both. As you can see, we're surrounded on the north and the east and the south by producing states. We compete with those states for investment. And part of that competition has to do with how oil companies decide where they're going to put their money. And they make those decisions based on a number of factors. Geology, where we do pretty well. Topography, where we're not in quite such good shape. Drilling, completion, and operating expenses for wells, which we tend to be pretty expensive. Tax policy and rates, where up until now we're okay. Transportation, where our stranded oil, waxy crude oil, can only be trucked because it solidifies at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can only drive from the Uinta Basin to Salt Lake City with it before that starts to happen. So we have that issue. We also have climate issues. We're very cold in the wintertime, in the basin especially. And we have air and water quality issues, particularly with respect to ozone in the wintertime in the Uinta Basin. A way of looking at this is that on this map, look at these states and consider that the drilling rig count, that is the number of rigs that are operating at a given time, is an indicator of investor interest in an area. Since an estimated 150 direct and indirect jobs are associated with each operating rig, it's also an indicator of rural employment health. At this point, two states, Montana and Utah, have 4 rigs running. That's by far the smallest number. Colorado has 23, New Mexico has 102, North Dakota 48, and Wyoming 24. An indicator of past faith in the area is what the 2018 oil production was. So the cumulative annual oil production for these states for 2018 is Colorado 142 million barrels, Montana 21.5 million barrels, New Mexico 250 million barrels, North Dakota 460 million barrels, Utah 37 million barrels, and Wyoming 87.9 million barrels. As you can see, we're one of the smaller producers and we have the lowest rig count. These should be concerns because they are artificial problems that are created by the fact that our oil production can't really exceed Salt Lake refinery capacity to refine it, which is around where we are right now. And so producing more oil means that it has to be transported by truck over the mountains out of the Uinta Basin to a point near Wellington where it can be shipped by rail to the Gulf Coast. There's demand for it there, but the cost of that extra transportation is high. We need a lot of help to make this work, and that's why the railroad proposal for $1.5 billion railroad starting in Mighton and taking oil from the center of the Uinta Basin to the Union Pacific Railroad tracks a few miles north of Helper, from where it can be sent to the Gulf Coast, is a major, major thing. And applying this new tax to oil and gas activity will dampen activity, just as we need to see activity increase. We need to see an increase of 130,000 barrels a day in the Uinta Basin to justify the investment to build this railroad. So There are a number of reasons that this is a bad time to apply a new tax to this industry. I want to make sure that you understand that we pay a severance tax that nobody else pays. We pay all the other taxes that businesses pay, and in addition to that, we pay a severance tax, and it's a significant tax. We not only pay the severance tax to the state of Utah, but we pay it if we're on Indian land, which a third of the new drilling is projected to be on tribal land in the Uinta Basin. We pay a severance tax to the Ute tribe. It's 10% to the tribe in the Uinta Basin, and it's 7% on the Navajo Reservation. We also pay on our oil production ad valorem property tax. Now, we pay property tax like everybody else does on the equipment that's at the surface. We just pay the personal property tax to the county on that. But we also go through a discounted cash flow analysis to determine the fair market value of the minerals in the ground, and we pay a tax. Then they apply the state or the county tax rate to that. So we pay another tax that's totally dependent on us producing oil wells. If the sales tax is applied to a typical well, right now the typical wells being drilled in the Uinta Basin are horizontal wells with a 2-mile long horizontal lateral. And these are typically 10,000 feet deep. And they typically cost $10 million to drill. About 80% of that $10 million is for items that you can see on this authorization for expenditure, which is essentially a budget for drilling and completing a well. About 80% of these costs currently don't pay sales tax because they're services. The other 20% are for things like pipe and tanks and all kinds of things that have salvage value that we do pay sales tax for and always have. So we're used to that. Adding this new tax would add approximately a 5% cost to the $10 million cost of drilling a well, so $500,000. That's enough money to get the attention of a company trying to decide whether to drill in Wyoming or Colorado or Utah. It will not be helpful to raising our rig count from 4 and raising our production numbers from 80,000 or 85,000 barrels a day. It just won't. A very high percentage of our drilling, completion, and operating costs are for services. If you put the tax on these services, it will negatively impact our already weak competitive position. It will add a 5% cost to the drilling of a new well, which will slow that down, and it will likely force a number of oil and gas wells, particularly gas wells that are marginally producing right now, to their economic limit. When they reach their economic limit, if they stay there for a few months, they will be plugged and abandoned, and all revenue that you receive from those wells now, including sales tax on the items for which sales tax is paid, severance tax, ad valorem property tax to the counties, royalties to the state, federal government, the Ute Indian tribe, Navajo tribe, those will all go away for that well. The timing of this effort is terrible. Progress is being made on efforts to build the railroad out of the Uinta Basin. We're looking at a 2 to 3 year lead time. It would be much better and much more likely to result in increased revenue in the state if the legislature would slow down, see whether the railroad gets built and whether the increase in production increases your revenues, as I believe it will, enough so that you're better off than you would be if you imposed the sales tax and slowed the business down right now. I appreciate your time and consideration. It's important that you understand that the sales tax on sales that don't take place because the activity stopped will be zero. Tax policy has the capability of slowing down or stopping the oil and gas activity that we have now. This will have an effect on the rural economy of Utah. It will have an effect on state revenues, county revenues, tribal revenues, all up and down the boardwalk. It's extremely important that we not load more taxes on an industry that already pays substantial taxes, including taxes that no other industry even knows exist. Thank you.